So, and I'll give you a brief introduction within the context of this. My name is Neil Mammen. I have a ministry called No Blind Faith, as you can see on the slides. And what I'm trying to avoid here is I'm trying to avoid my slides being 4 seconds behind me. So if you'll see the slide change on the picture, and then you'll actually see the slide change on your desktop, my presentation, which I'm sharing. So hopefully between the two of those, even though this is going to be a bit brighter than it should be, I didn't have a chance to adjust the brightness on it. But if you want to know, this is a monitor I designed and built myself. It's a Dolby monitor. If you ever go buy a TV that says Dolby Vision, this is the original Dolby Vision. I designed all the Dolby Vision monitors. So that's what that is. So this is one of the original ones. So a lot of the movies that you watch on Netflix are mixed on these monitors. So, but anyway, that gives you that background. But so my ministry is called No Blind Faith. I'm an engineer during the day, and at night I'm an apologist. So this was the stuff I'm going to talk about today is from my book, Jesus is Involved in Politics. Why aren't you? Why isn't your church? And that was kind of scary for people. So I came up with the kinder, gentler version, which is 40 Days Towards a More Godly Nation. Who doesn't want a more godly nation? Well, the actual difference between the two books is on the first one, I name names and I name parties and I name all that. The second one is like a less non-partisan version, the kinder, gentler version, if you will. So, so I was born in Ghana at a very early age. Some of you guys are thinking that's a town in Texas. That's actually a country off the west coast of Africa. And my parents were Indians, as you can probably tell. They date their heritage back to St. Thomas in 51 AD. When St. Thomas came to India, he basically witnessed to about 70 families, we believe, and converted them. And those families ended up being what we call the Marthoma Church of India, which is the church of, Marthoma means St. Thomas Church. And we hail our ancestry back to that. Now, I was born in Ghana, but then I grew up in Jamaica, Ethiopia, Yemen, and Sudan. And Sudan sounds like a town in Texas. It is a town in Texas, but that's not the town I grew up in. The town that I grew up in is actually the country of Sudan on the west coast of Africa, and where they speak Arabic. Now, my dad had been flying around the world. He was a professor in physics. And throughout his travels, he'd go to the different countries. He'd teach at different universities. We call him a mercenary because he was paid by the government of foreign countries. And he ended up in Yemen. And I want to tell you this story about when I was in Yemen. I had been in Yemen for about 3 years. I was 18 years old and I was going to college there. And Yemen is a country under Sharia law. And so women, and it's very strict, and women wear burqas, right? So I had been there for 3 years and I was ready to leave and I wanted to come somewhere else. And I knew there had to be more to women than this, right? Because that's all I'd see there. And so I said, I want to go to America. And I was looking through all the different, we had movies from different countries, and American movies had the most beautiful women in the world. And I said, I got to come to America and I got to find one of these beautiful women. And I did. And there she is. And I married her. And so I had to convince her to marry me. But anyway, so she, those are not our kids. Those are our flower girls. So just in case you're wondering. So those are our kids. We can see we have 3 kids. They're all, there's Alistair, he's the youngest. He's protesting a Planned Parenthood in Portland. I think he was like 1.5 at that age. But anyway, there he is, a bit closer to age now. So the kids, oh wait, I got distracted. I was telling you a story, wasn't I? Okay. So I'm here in Yemen and I want to come to America. And at that point, they don't have emails. They only have something called telexes and barely have faxes. And so I look around, I find a college that my dad could afford, and we sit down and my dad says, well, the only way I can afford this is if I continue to work here as a professor at the University of Sana'a, which is the capital of Yemen. And we said, okay, well, there's no reason why you would not be able to do that. Well, so we got all our tickets about 2 months at a time. And I remember about a month ahead of time when he walks in from work, he comes home early, and he sits us all down, and he says that he's been fired. And we were shocked. And what we found out was that a few days later, we found out that the reason he'd been fired was that a professor, a fellow professor at his work, had committed suicide. And when the police went into the professor's bedroom, they found a Bible with my father's name on it. You see, in Yemen, it is illegal to give someone who is not a Christian a Bible, right? Now, you ask yourself, well, should I have the right to give somebody a Bible? Yeah, you should. Where do I get the right to give somebody a Bible? Well, in Yemen, they believe rights come from government. So let me ask you this. Do our rights come from the government? Right? Now you can answer this. This is not a rhetorical question. This is a question. This is the interactive portion of the talk. So let me ask you guys, do our rights come from government? And hopefully you said no, right? Our rights do not come from government. Let me tell you why our rights cannot come from the government. One, who gives the government the authority to control our rights? And this is what we'll discuss shortly. But here's the other problem. If rights came from government, then government could legally, ethically, morally, and justly take away those same rights for any made-up reason, including like for your safety. Like right today, we have all this COVID hysteria going on. The government says, oh, for your safety, we're going to lock you up. We're going to put you away. For your safety, you can't do this, that, and the other. So government can come up with any reason to take away your rights. So rights can't come from the government because one, who gives them that authority? And two, can rights, so the next question is, can I give myself rights? Can I say, hey, I'm emperor, and so therefore I'm going to force all of you guys to treat me like an emperor? I can't do that. Why? Because I don't have authority over you. So rights can't come from myself. Well, how about the masses? Can rights come from the masses? And this is what people think when they think of government. Oh yeah, we can vote to give the government authority to give us our rights. Well, if rights come from the masses, then we have a serious problem. Here's why we have a serious problem. Because then the Nazis could get together and decide that they're not going to give the Jews any rights. Is that morally okay? Well, the answer is not, wrong. But here's the other thing. Even if you, especially if you're going to argue with someone who's not a Christian, who's from the left side of the aisle, they will say, yeah, rights come from the masses. And then you say, well, then you have a serious problems with slaves. They go, why? Well, they say, well, let me ask you this. Did the slaves get new rights when the nice white people decided to give them rights, or was the fact that they always had rights? And this is the answer. See, the question is not that the slaves got new rights. The reality is the slaves always had rights, but these rights were unjustly being violated, and it wasn't until the majority in the state recognized those pre-existing rights that justice was achieved. Right? It wasn't that some nice white people decided to give them rights. They always had rights, but they were being violated. So where did these pre-assigned rights come from? How did they have these rights? So we know that rights don't come from the masses. So where did they get their rights from? Where did the slaves get their rights from? Where did we get our rights from? Well, let's look at the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence says what? It says we hold these truths. You know the thing, right? The thing. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their, what? By the masses, by the government, by themselves? No, by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Why does it have to be a creator? Well, it's quite simply, who is the only person that go to Hitler and say, I have authority over you, that you have to give equal rights to the Jews? Who has the authority over every single slave owner to say, I have the authority over every single slave owner to tell every single slave owner that you have to give equal rights to the slaves? Only the person who has rights over all man, has authority over all mankind, could dictate for all mankind how they should treat each other. And that's why rights can only come from the creator. And that's why it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. These are logical and rational conclusions. It can come from no other way. So either there are no rights, or the rights have to come from the one authority. Now, here's where a lot of Christians get lost. They go, well, that came from the Enlightenment, or that, no, that didn't come from the Enlightenment. That came from the Bible. You see, for the 200 years before Jefferson wrote this down, and people go, well, Jefferson was a genius. He was a genius, but he didn't come up with this idea. In fact, he got these ideas from other pastors, from preachers, preaching from the pulpit. And in fact, I have a whole sermon where I show the quotes from the pastors, and I show them how that exact idea is in the Declaration of Independence. So what does that mean? That means that rights come from the creator. Now this means something though. If rights come from the Creator, that means if you have a biblical Creator, then you have unalienable rights. Now, let me notice, you notice I just slipped in the biblical Creator there. Well, how could I do that? Well, quite simply. I grew up around the world, as I mentioned. I grew up in Africa. I'm from Indian parents. So I've grown up in India. I've grown up in Ethiopia and Jamaica and Ghana, all these places. And I've studied all these religions. As an apologist, I've become an expert, sort of expert on Hinduism, Islam, Mormonism, you name it. You know, I've been studying it mainly so because I get in arguments with people and I have to defend my view. But every single religion that I've ever looked at does not have, except for Christianity, does not have equal rights. Islam certainly does not have equal rights. Hinduism has a caste system, no equal rights there. Buddhism is atheistic in principle, so you have no creator, right? You can go all down the line. There are no religions, and no old religions, and very few new religions that weren't copied from Christianity that has equal rights for all people. So it has to be the biblical creator. It's only the Judeo-Christian Bible that says all men are created equal. There's no slave or free, Jew or Gentile, man or woman, they're all equal in God's sight. So no Bible, no creator, that means you have no unalienable rights. And this is a problem. Because if you take the Bible out of our law, government, if you take the Bible out of our laws, if you take the Bible out of our Senate and the Capitol, then guess what? You don't have unalienable rights. You have only rights that are given to people by the masses. And then you get what? Hitler, and you get Germany, and you get the slave trade, and you get all that stuff. So it's so important that you understand that if you take the Bible out of the law, if you take the Bible out of government, you don't have equal rights or any rights. So then what is the purpose of government? So if we don't, or if it doesn't give us rights, then what is the purpose of government? What does the Declaration of Independence say? It says what? That to secure these rights, governments are institutions amongst men. So what it's there for is the government is there not to give you rights, but to protect the rights that you already have. I play a game when I talk to folks. I ask them, I open the session up, I say, do you have constitutional rights? Everybody looks at each other, go, of course we have constitutional rights. I said, no, you don't. So you don't have constitutional rights because the Constitution doesn't give you any rights. In fact, if you look at the Constitution, you'll see it's a list of negative rights. Even the Bill of Rights doesn't give you rights. It's a list of negative rights. It says the government cannot do this, the government cannot do that, the government has to stop this, it shall not abridge the freedom of. It's a list of negative rights. The Constitution does not give you rights. You do not have constitutional rights. You have God-given rights. What the Constitution does is protect those rights that you already have. It's very important to understand the distinction. If you forget that distinction, you will think that the government gives you rights. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, we can summarize something. One, you can't separate politics from lawmaking, can you? Right? We always know that you can't separate lawmaking. You can't separate lawmaking from morality because it's immoral to violate someone's rights. Right? Okay, you can't separate morality from a moral authority. In our case, the biblical creator. You don't have the rights, in fact, every moral authority has to come from, every moral law has to come from moral authority, because otherwise you're not what? You're not indebted, you're not, you don't have to obey. You're morally, you don't care. If somebody says you have to do this, it means nothing unless they have a moral authority over you. So therefore, you can't separate the biblical creator from Christianity and the church. And therefore, what does that mean? Well, quite simply, you can't separate politics from Christianity and the church. If you want a free nation, you can't separate politics from Christianity. You can't separate politics from the church. Now, a lot of you are thinking, wait, whoa. But we don't want a theocracy. Yeah, well, I do another talk about what a real theocracy was, going back to the original theocracy founded by Moses. But yes, we don't want a theocracy as defined by man. And let me explain why we don't. It's quite simple. Presbyterians don't want a Baptist government. Assembly of God don't want a Baptist government. Charismatics don't want a Baptist government. Church of Christ don't want a Baptist government. In fact, for crying out loud, even Baptists don't want a Baptist government, right? They've been to those meetings. They know how horrible it is. They're like, no, we don't want. So we don't want a Christian government. We want a moral government. We don't want a Christian government. We want Christians in government. See the difference? It's so important to understand. We don't want a Christian government. We want Christians in government. We don't want a church government. We want a moral government. And these are so important concepts. And many people and pastors forget it. Now there's the whole thing about, Christian nationalism. No. We don't want a Christian government. We want Christians in government. We want Christians to have the free speech and the free enterprise. And we want Christians to be involved in politics. We want Christians to be involved in every aspect of politics. And yeah, if you're an atheist or a Mormon, fine. Or Mormons are welcome. We love their moral values, right? But if you're a Buddhist or whatever, you're welcome to compete with us fairly on the stage in politics. But guess what? Christians need to be involved in politics. They need to get there. So, well, and if that's the case, if morality comes from the church, I mean, from the Bible, then who better to instruct the world in moral issues, right? Pastors. In fact, if you look at the old, the founding of our nation, if you look at all during the revolutionary time and all that, who were the leaders of the movement? It was pastors, because they understand freedom of religion. I mean, the very fact that America was founded because a group of pilgrims wanted freedom of religion from their king makes clearer to us that pastors and leaders and religious people should be involved in the foundation of our politics and our laws, because otherwise we'll have to move again to another state, another country. Okay. Now, I've talked about rights, right? I said, you know, that we get our rights from the Creator, from God. Well, what are rights? A lot of people get confused about rights. For instance, is healthcare a right? Is education a right? Is freedom of speech a right? Right? Is having a gun a right? You know, these are all, people will disagree, right? So what are rights? I'm going to teach you a way on how to identify what a right is and what something else is. You know, is healthcare a right? So on your slide there, you'll see that we have a column there. It's one side it says rights, on the other side it says something else. I'm going to flash something up there, and I want you to tell me if it's a right or something else, right? Now, I know most of you are muted, but you can go a thumbs up for a right and a thumbs down for something else, okay? So now, be careful. There are some trick questions here, okay? So first thing, is this a right? Thumbs up or thumbs down? I got lots of thumbs up. Okay, sorry folks, I fooled you. This is not a right, this is a gun. There's a right tied to that, right? What is a right? The right is what? Right to bear arms, gun ownership, right? You have the right to keep and bear arms. Now, let me tell you why why you may have gotten confused, because I just showed you the gun. But here's the reason why the gun is not a right. You are not entitled to a gun. If you want a gun, you have the right to own the gun, but you have to buy your own gun. You have to work and do the labor to get your own gun. You are not entitled to be given a gun by the government, and worse, you're not entitled to be given a gun by your neighbors. Your neighbors are not forced to get together and raise funds to give you a gun. You have to get your own gun. Okay, how about this one? Freedom of speech, is that a right? Some of you are going, well, yeah, it is a right. Thumbs up, come on everybody, thumbs up. Freedom of speech is a right? Now, what about this though? A printing press. Now, some of you guys are really young and you don't know what a printing press is. Let me explain. In the old days, we used to have newspapers, and they'd run these off in the printing press, and that's how you got your word. You didn't have Twitter, we didn't have Facebook. That's how you got your news. That's how you got your opinion out there. It was a printing press, right? Now today they use them. They don't even have printing presses anymore because there's no pressing. It's a big printing machine. It's an inkjet printer or something. So they don't exist anymore, except in antique shows. But the printing press is important. Now, is the printing press a right? No, it's not a right. Why is it not a right? Well, quite simply because you have the right to have freedom of speech, but you're not entitled to be given a printing press. You have to buy your own printing press. Does that make sense? You have to go out there, you have to work, you have to earn money, and then you have to go and buy your printing press. You don't automatically get entitled. The government, US government, doesn't have to give you a printing press, okay? So now you're getting the idea here. So here's a bunch of them. Now remember, a home ownership, a job, healthcare, food, clothing, education. Are these rights or are these something else? Now, be careful. There is a trick question in here, right? Are these rights or something else? Most of you guys are like, well, those are all something else. Well, there is a right there, and there's the right. The home ownership is a right. You see that? Home ownership. You have the right to own a home. You have the freedom to buy a home, but you're not entitled to be given a home. You're not entitled to receive a home. I shouldn't say be given, because somebody can give you a home if they want to, but you're not entitled to be forced to have your neighbors give you a home, would be probably more accurate, right? So now you're going to think, well, I kind of get the hint of it, but gist of it, but how do I actually document this? Well, here's how you would explain to somebody. Rights are things that God gives you, right? God gives you rights. He gives you the rights. Nobody else can give you rights. God gives you rights. Now, what's the something else? The something else is what we call goods and services. Goods and services are the product of somebody's labor, right? So anytime something is the product of somebody's labor, that is a good or a service. Anytime it's something that God gives you, that is a right. So God gives you the right to own a gun. You know, if he gave you a gun, that would be yours, but you're not entitled to have your neighbors work and produce a gun for you. Okay, so now you are entitled to, you have a right to your own goods, but not to somebody else's goods. That's stealing. So anytime there is an item that you're wondering whether it's a right or something else, ask yourself, is that something else a product of somebody's labor? For instance, education. Is education the product of somebody's labor? And hopefully you're like, yes, education is the product of somebody's labor. Because how are you going to get that? Let's say I say I'm going to give you a free education. Where am I going to get that education from? Am I going to go out and enslave a number of teachers and then whip them until they give you a good education? No, I can't do that. So what I do is I enslave everybody, take 30% of their salary, and that give people very lousy educations. Right? Education has gone down since it's become compulsory and since the government has been paying for it. We used to have a literacy rate of 97%. Now we're lucky if we're in the 70%. African Americans used to have a literacy rate of 70% during the Jim Crow days and during discrimination and all that. Today, they're lucky if they have an 18% literacy rate in the inner city. Right? So public education is not working, but more than that, public education should not be a right. It's goods and services. How about healthcare? Where are you going to get the healthcare for? Let's say I promise everybody free healthcare. Where am I going to get the healthcare from? Do I got to enslave a bunch of doctors and whip them until they provide free healthcare? Obviously not. Instead, I enslave everybody and I take a portion of their goods and services that they have provided for, take their portion of their labor and assign it to other people. So here's how you want to think about this. Goods that are granted as rights require you to enslave men fiscally or physically to ensure a continuous supply of the goods that you promised to others. See, and this is the problem that we're seeing now. We're constantly allocating goods and services as rights, and we're having to enslave more and more people, or we're enslaving everybody more and more of their time and their work to provide these goods and services. And guess what? It's actually making things worse. Okay, let's talk about socialism. Socialism is a great principle. You know, people go, well, what about socialism? I mean, was Jesus a socialist? So the idea of socialism is that everybody works as hard as they can. Because now you're thinking about, what about charity? I mean, how do I deal with the poor people? How do I deal with the sick people? So the idea of socialism basically is that everybody works as hard as they can and only take what they need. But socialism forgets the sin nature of man. Remember the 7 deadly sins. Right? The 7 deadly sins, the acronym is WASP-like. You know, wrath, avarice, greed, sloth, laziness, pride, lust, envy, and gluttony, right? So we forget about that. Now let's look at the 2 of them, greed and laziness, right? And gluttony, actually that's a good one too, right? Look what happens when we plug socialism into that equation. Socialism says all men will work as much as they can and take as little as they need. That's what socialism is. But remember, 7 deadly sins, sin nature says what? Instead of all men will work as much as they can and take as little as they need, what happens? We're lazy, we're greedy, and we're gluttonous, right? So what happens? All men will work what? As little as they need, and they take as much as they can. And guess what? When they work so little and they take so much, we have scarcity and you get Venezuela, right? Why? Because there's just not enough goods and services being produced. You know, there's a great little meme that I ran across. It says, in communist and socialist countries, people wait for bread. In capitalist and free market countries, bread waits for people. And they show the stores in a communist country and they show the stores in a capitalist country, and the bread is just in abundance. Why? Because there's an incentive to work that greed and gluttony and enviness is actually being used for a positive change. A few years ago, somebody came on my website, on my Facebook page, and you know, I encourage you to join my Facebook page. It's Jesus Politics Neil, and I only have it so I can irritate my liberal friends and get engaged with them in discussions. Most of my other stuff I'm moving to Gab, but this gal came on and said, well, Jesus fed the poor and healed the sick, so Jesus was a socialist. And this is the argument here. Well, Jesus took care of the poor. Shouldn't we take care of the poor? Shouldn't our government reflect taking care of the poor? So I said, well, Yeah, I guess. Let's go back to the source story. The whole concept of taking care of the poor was introduced by Jesus. I mean, it was introduced in the Old Testament, don't get me wrong, but it was introduced by Jesus in the story of the Good Samaritan. This is what most people think about, is the story of the Good Samaritan. But here's the problem with the story of the Good Samaritan. We always forget the ending. And we always forget that one person. You know, we think of the Good Samaritan, you think of the poor guy who got beat up. We always forget the innkeeper. So let me refresh your memory. A lot of you might have not read the Good Samaritan story lately. So here's how it goes. Good Samaritan's walking down the road. He sees a guy getting beat up, or he's seen the guy who was beaten up. He goes and he tends to him and he puts him on his horse or donkey and he takes him into the innkeeper. He says to the innkeeper, here's some money. Please take care of him. If it's not enough, when I come back, I want you to pay the other half of it. Right? Because we should all share in the poor guy's pain. Is that what Jesus said? Hopefully you're nodding your head saying no. No, that's not what Jesus said. What Jesus said was what? He said, no, here's the poor man that's beaten up. If there's not enough money, when I come back, I'm going to go to all your neighbors and beat them up until they pay me the rest of the money to pay for the rest of this guy's, pay me the rest of the money for this guy. Is that what he said? No, you're right. He didn't say that. I know what he said. He said, here's half the money. When I come back, I'm going to bring the IRS with guns, and they're going to go and threaten every one of your neighbors with imprisonment and loss of their house until they pay for this poor man who got beaten up. Not what he said, is he? He said, when I come back, the Samaritan says, I will pay for it. He doesn't ask anyone to do it unless it's voluntarily. See, Jesus said, you give to the poor, not force your neighbor to. He said, take the shirt off your back, not the shirt off your neighbor's back. You see, socialism is nothing more than forcing your neighbor to give to your favorite charity at the point of an IRS agent's gun. You can't write that into the Bible. The Bible never talks about socialism, even with Ananias and Sapphira. He says, Peter says, it was yours to do as you please. But the reason why you are now going to join your husband is because you lied to the Holy Spirit. So Jesus was saying, it's not the state's job to take care of the poor, it's the church's job to take care of the poor. And that's what we've done for 2,000 years. In fact, Florence Nightingale, she pioneered believing that God had called her to take care of the sick. I mean, I grew up in Africa, right? We had missionary hospitals and we had government hospitals. I grew up with universal healthcare, trust me. I mean, in Yemen, man, we had universal healthcare. It was the greatest for me. Why? Because we would go to the doctor's office and there would be 100 people sitting in line waiting to see the doctor. The attendant would look up, she'd see my dad and says, oh, Dr. Nyland, come on in. And we would go to the head of the line. Why? Because the doctor was an Indian, also hired by the same company. And we used to hang out together. You see, in socialistic universal healthcare, the special people get special privileges. The rest of the schmucks get to sit in line for 100 and wait and wait and wait. And I always tell my liberal friends, guess what? You're going to be one of the schmucks if we get into universal healthcare. Why? Because socialism doesn't work that way. So I was on a radio show a few years ago, and I said, on the radio show, I said, look, I think the church should take care of the poor. And this lady called in and she said, well, you're crazy. Yeah, maybe in Africa, the church can take care of the poor. Maybe in those backward countries, your church can come in. But I was at my hospital the other day and we had the latest MRI and CAT scan and everything. And I'm on this radio show and I usually don't go on liberal radio show hosts, talk shows. And this guy was, the guy who booked me said, oh, he's a really nice guy. You'll be fine. I'm like, okay, fine. So I go on the radio show and I introduce this and he keeps me on for all 3 hours. He can't all his guests because guess what? He's a liberal radio show. So all his guests are liberals. They're all calling in and yelling at me. And so he was like, oh, Neil, can you stay longer and get yelled at? I'm like, fine. So halfway through this lady calls up and says, you are a mean-spirited, evil person because you want people to die. And I said, why? Because you think your church can take care of people. So I said, well, ma'am, let me ask you a question. She goes, what? I'm kind of snipperty lady. I said, can you tell me the name of your hospital? Long silence. I said, ma'am, could you tell me the name of your hospital? Long silence. The host starts cracking up because he knows where this is going. So he finally says, ma'am, would you tell Mr. Mammen the name of your hospital? And she says, St. James, but that's not important. I'm like, man, what do you think that name? I said, look at any hospital, Good Samaritan, St. Pete, St. Jude's, whatever it's called. Most of the hospitals in America are founded and started by Christian organizations. Now, yeah, now churches aren't running it anymore because of all of the different issues that are going on, but it was started by us and we can keep doing it. In fact, the only reason why healthcare is so expensive today is for two reasons. One, the government got involved and the government had to give it, and the hospitals had to give it away for free. Ronald Reagan said, if you want sand to be impossible to get and very expensive, then have the government give sand away for free. Why will it be, what will happen? Well, here's what will happen. First of all, while the government's giving away from sand, some people in the government say, we can't just give away any sand. You have to have graded government-approved sand. And then one of the cronies of the government friend, the cronies say, hey, I will start a grading company for sand, which I'd never done before in my life. And I will grade the sand for you if you give me, and I will contribute to your campaign. And so this grading company now controls the sand. And they say, well, you know what? We better make it against the law for people to go to the beach and collect their own sand because they might get unapproved sand, or they may be getting sand and bypassing all these things. And guess what? Sand becomes impossible to get unless you go through the grading company. And then, yeah, it's free, but guess what? The taxes are paying for it, right? And this is exactly what happens with healthcare. You see, the government is so inefficient at taking care of people. In fact, I calculate the government is almost 6 times less efficient than most charities. Why? Well, a few years ago, I got this. We live in San Jose, and there's a group here called City Team. It's actually around the world now. City Team sent out this ad. It says it costs the city between $40,000 to $60,000 to care for a homeless person. It costs City Team $12,000. So we had I run a group here. It's called the Values Advocacy Council, and we invited the mayor to speak one month. And I asked him this question. I said, I got this flyer, and it says this, and he got very snooty. He goes, "Where'd you get that information from?" Now it turned out that the guy who wrote the ad was sitting in the crowd, and he says, "Oh, we got actually the number is 67,000, and we got it off the city website." You see, what happens is they have homeless people who are being they have emergency room visits. They have to pay for those emergency. And healthcare costs are really high. They have all these special. They have the police enforcement. They have the crime. They add it up, and it comes up something like $67,000. Now, City Team can do it for $12,000. What after the meeting was over, I was talking to the guy who wrote the ad, and he said, one thing we didn't include in the ad is after you spend the $12,000, that homeless person is off the streets. After the city spends that $67,000, the homeless person goes right back on the street again. See, government is actually 1/6 as bad. I mean, it's actually unloving to let the government continue to be in the business of charity when we could help 2 to 5 times the number of needy people with the same amount of money. Now, let's be honest though, we can't get there overnight because people will be dying in the streets. So the church must first take its place back, first take back the leadership and resume its proper role as a leading charity provider. And many churches are doing that, but we're not gotten back to where we were before LBJ and FDR passed the Great Society and the New Deal. We've got to get back to that and then slowly cut this down. I was traveling the state of Kansas a few years ago with Governor Sam Brownback at the time. And I got a chance to meet with the Kansas legislature. And I said, look, guys, and just the Christians, I said, look, guys, if you ever get a chance, here's the rule. You've got to pass a law that says for every dollar you donate to a charity, you get $2 in discounts and tax rebate or tax deductions. Why? Because that will mean the giving will go up. And guess what? The government is just saving money because for every dollar you give in charity, the government saves $6. So giving you $2 of tax deductions is nothing. Now, I get into all these arguments on the internet, and this guy comes on and says, well, you're stupid. I said, why? He says, you think your church can replace all the charity in America? I said, well, actually, I think they could. He said, oh, that's impossible. He said, our charity bill, part of our debt, our budget, is $1.2 trillion a year. That's for all the Medicaid and all the caring of the poor and all that. That's not the states, but it's the federal government. He says, you think your churches can provide $1.2 trillion? I said, well, if I'm right and we're 6 times as efficient, we don't need $1.2 trillion. We only need $200,000. And by the way, that calculation was made by Ram Kannan and a bunch of other people that were 6 times more efficient. And it's documented in the book. And they calculated that based on paying people $11 an hour. I don't know about you, but no government worker makes $11 an hour. They make $30 an hour, and then they get pensions for life, right? So it's far more. It's probably something like $70 an hour. But okay, let's say just say that we stick to the numbers. So we can do all that for $200 million, right? Yeah, sorry, 1.2 trillion. We can do all that for $200 billion. So this guy starts laughing. He says, $200 million. Ah, $200 million. Do you think a church is going to raise $200 million? I said, well, actually, last year, the church and individuals gave over $410 billion to charity. $410 billion, and that's mainly by individuals. By the way, that's 9 times more than the next closest was the Germans, and 11 times more than the next closest was the Italians. America is the most giving nation in the world. And for all the years of the New Deal and the Great Society, the percentage of the poor has not changed much at all. In fact, things have gotten worse because fatherlessness and all that. And this is something we do. I lead a ministry called Every Black Life Matters, which is a spiritual and biblical response to BLM. BLM is a bunch of Marxists and a bunch of witches, right? And they do it, and they're basically everything they propose is actually going to make things worse in the African American community. So we started Every BLM with the Frederick Douglass Foundation, the Every Black Life Matters. It's a biblically based conservative group, and it's spreading like wildfire. You should go to our website, everyblm.com, everyblm.com. It's great. We have a t-shirt that says Every Black Life Matters. You run into a BLM protester and you just say, well, let me ask you a question. Let's say you're talking to a BLM protester and you say, hey, can I ask you a question? And they're saying, Black Lives Matter. So I said, does every Black life matter to you? Now, of course, they're going to say yes. You say, well, let me ask you this. I said, do you know that in the inner city, because of our socialist welfare policies, 75% of African Americans are fatherless, 75%. Do those young African lives matter to you? African American lives matter to you? Of course, they're going to say yes. So you see, because of that fatherlessness, we have gangs and drugs and violence. And as a result of gangs and violence, drugs and violence and suicides and all that, the inner city schools are horrible because they're full of gangs and drugs and violence. And yet a majority African American moms and dads, the dads who are involved, want their kids to get a school voucher so they can go to a different school, a better school. Do those school kid Black lives matter to you? And of course, what are they going to say? They're going to say yes. And then we say, well, let me ask you one more question. Did you know that there would be 36% more African Americans in America today if they hadn't been murdered in the womb? There's a genocide going up. There would be 36. Do you care about African Americans? You care about Black lives? Then why are you letting them be killed and destroyed? 36% of them have been killed. Do those baby Black lives matter to you? And of course, they'll probably say yes. And then you say, well, in that case, you really are on my side because every Black life matters, not just the ones killed by police. It's a very powerful statement. And we've shut down protesters and they've just kind of immediately left the scene after that. But anyway, so all to say, here's the other problem why Christians should be really worried about government being involved. Every time the government meets somebody's physical needs, the church has lost an opportunity to witness and show Christ's love to that person. We're losing the opportunity to care. In most socialist countries, the church is dying. Why? Because they are not seen as being needed to meet your needs. Okay, let's take a little detour here. Let me ask you this. What is the job of politicians? No, I've heard them all, yeah. To control, to become dictators, I understand, to become rich, right? That's what they want to do. But their real job is to make laws. I mean, the reason we have politicians, we elect politicians to make laws. But why are there laws? Why do we have a law? The law is there for a purpose. What is that purpose? Today, let's say you leave your house, you go down the street, you see a stop sign. Is that stop sign there because they don't want you to have fun? Or is that stop sign there for another purpose? What's the stop sign there? Stop sign is there to protect us, right? In the same way, God's laws are there to protect us. Every single one of God's laws were given to protect us, right? And there's not a law that protects God. God, when you blaspheme God, he's not going out there, oh no, you used my name in vain. He's not worried about. What we've done is you've ruined the relationship with God. That's why when you blaspheme God, you ruin the relationship with God. So if you look at the 10 commandments, there, the first 4 are about your relationship with God. The next 6 are your relationship with your neighbor, right? Love God, love your neighbor. That's what the 10 commandments is, right there, quite in summary. Now, so God isn't there saying, oh no, you hurt me. He's saying, oh no, you're going to hurt yourself. And so the more we follow God's law, the happier, healthier, and mutually prosperous we'll be. So imagine now if God gave us his laws to protect us and we start violating them, we're going to get hurt. So let's say we have a nation that starts violating God's laws. Who is going to get hurt? And here's the other question. Who's going to get hurt first? 1, we're going to get hurt. 2, who's going to get hurt first? Is it going to be the rich people? Is it going to be the wealthy, the affluent? No, it's going to be the poor and the homeless and the orphans and the widows. They're going to get hurt first. And to give you an example of this, let's talk about a moral issue of law that was changed. Divorce and family. Years ago, a man I admired greatly made a slip. He made 2 or 3 slips. His name was Ronald Reagan. Back in about 69 or so, this whole issue of no-fault divorce came up. Ronald Reagan didn't veto it. He should have. What happens, no-fault divorce spread around the country. Now, this is not a condemnation about anyone who's divorced. We live in a sinful world, and the Bible does not say divorce is wrong. It just says when it is appropriate. But now, all of a sudden, you can divorce anyone for any reason. Oh, I just got tired. I'm not in love with them. That's never been a good reason to get a divorce. So divorce started spreading around. Soon it reached all 50 states, I think 49 states. I think there might be one state where it does not have no-fault divorce. And as a result, children from broken homes account for 29% of all kids. Yet, even though they account for 29% of all kids, they account for 70% of all long-term prison inmates. They account for 60% of rapists, 75% of teens charged with murder, 70% of violent criminals, 80% of those motivated by displaced anger, 75% of all juvenile criminals who are a threat to the public. There are 4,000 times, or 40 times more likely to experience child abuse. Children from broken homes are 3 times more likely to fail in school, 3 times more likely to require psychiatric treatment, 3 times more likely to commit suicide, twice likely to end up in jail, twice likely to be juvenile delinquent, and twice likely to be a pregnant teen. In fact, if you look at all the people in poverty and you drew a line, you would find out that 80% of the people in poverty, children in poverty today, would be out of poverty if their parents had been married or stayed married. And it's a self-spiraling cycle. Children of divorced parents are 200% more likely to divorce than adults. Now you tell me, is this a government issue? Is this a moral issue, or is it a fiscal issue? Is it a financial issue? Oh, we just need to raise more money. Or is it really a moral issue? In fact, look at all the things that are affected by this one bad moral law. Crime, suicide, vandalism, welfare, murder, drugs, gangs, psychological. I mean, most of these, remember our $1.2 trillion welfare? I'm betting 60% of those would go away if no-fault divorce wasn't the case today. She's written up that cost. Now, here's the thing. We know the cause. Are we supposed to stand around and just bind the wounds? That Dietrich Bonhoeffer said of Hitler, he said, the church's task is not simply to bind the wounds of the victim beneath the wheel, but to break the wheel itself. How can we continue to let bad laws be made in our nation's capital? Now, when I say that, some people are going to say, well, you can't legislate morality. Well, here's the reality. We can and do legislate morality all the time. We impose it on others. In fact, if you think about it, there's not a single law that we've ever passed that wasn't based on somebody's moral value. Now, it's true, it might not be your moral value. The law on abortion, not your moral value, somebody else's moral value, but it is a moral value. Every single law is based on somebody's moral value. There is not a single law that is not based on somebody's moral value. Okay. The second thing people say is, well, Jesus wasn't involved in politics. Well, I was sitting in a class one day, this is many years ago before I wrote my book, and I was teaching something along these lines, and I mentioned that Jesus was involved in politics, and they said, well, Jesus wasn't involved in politics, because he said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and God unto God, meaning he's saying stay out of politics. I said, oh. He said, well, here's the problem though. Jesus did not fight against racism or slavery either. Just because Jesus didn't do it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, right? You can't use that argument. There are lots of things that Jesus didn't do, we should do. Okay. But let's look at this actual argument. Jesus didn't get involved in politics. Is this true? It turns out this is completely false and a misunderstanding of history. I mean, now, remember when we were governing Iraq, right? We didn't run their local politics. Why? Because it's just hard. So go back to the Romans. Romans were governing Judea. But they had so many other nations that they were governing at the same time. There was no way they would get involved in the minutiae. So what they would do is they would let, just like in Iraq, we let them run their own politics. We were just governing at the top level. They had their own police force. They had their own army. They had their own politicians. They had their own elections. They had all that local. So did the Jews have that when the Romans were running? And the answer is, of course they did. Jesus didn't get involved in Roman politics because he wasn't a Roman citizen. He was what? He was a Jewish citizen. So if he wanted to get involved in Roman politics, he wouldn't have been able. Just imagine if an Iraqi had come in and said, I want to get involved in American politics. We'd say no. Right? So could Jesus have gotten involved in his local politics? Did he have legislators? Did he have senators? Did he have representatives? Well, it turns out there was a group of people. They were called the Sanhedrin. By the way, Judea had its own army. Herod's army was there. They had their own police force. They had their own jails. Remember, the apostles are thrown into a Jewish jail, not into a Roman jail when they're arrested, right? So they had a group that was called the Sanhedrin. And these are the guys who, the word means sitting together, hence assembly, is the name given to the council of 71 Jewish sages who constituted the Supreme Court and legislative body of ancient Israel. The makeup of the council included a chief justice, a vice chief justice, and 69 general members who all sat in the form of a semicircle when in session. In fact, that semicircle is what we copied when we did our legislature. So they had a Supreme Court and they had a legislative body. They had people who made the laws. So they had senators, they had representatives, they had judges. So who were these guys? And did Jesus ever interact with them? Or does Jesus always start shying away from them, saying, well, I'm not going to get involved in politics? Well, hopefully you are 30 seconds away from, you're 30 seconds ahead of me, and you know exactly. Who were the members of the Sanhedrin? Well, I'll tell you, it was the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Who else was Jesus talking to on a daily basis? He was yelling at them. He was telling them what? Your laws are unjust. He was saying, you've forgotten the three most important parts of the law. What? Justice, mercy, and faithfulness. He was talking to them all the time. He was saying, look, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The justice was not about justice of God. They had nothing to do with the justice of God. They were talking about the justice of their laws. Mercy, again, not God's mercy, but their mercy as their reigning force in their legal system. And faithfulness. Faithfulness was not faithfulness to God or faithfulness to God's law. Jesus was saying, look, the Sabbath was made for man, but you've taken it and twisted it. You've not kept the original intent. Jesus is what we call a strict constructionist or originalist. Jesus was talking to his Pharisees and Sadducees, to his senators. In fact, you can't even preach the gospel without repeating what Jesus said to his senator Nicodemus. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. I can't even preach the gospel without quoting what Jesus said to his senator. At the least, we should be witnessing to our senators, shouldn't we? Now you go, wait a minute. So Jesus never was always, I sent an email once and I kind of I called one of our elected representatives a name, and this guy, somebody says, you should never call our elected representatives a name because they're appointed by God, and so you should always honor them. And he said, well, I was just doing what Jesus did. He said, Jesus would never have done that. I said, yeah, well, he did call them whitewashed tombs, filthy, rotten tombs. He said, putrid graves. He said, who will save you from hell, you pit of vipers? Yeah, that's just a few nice words there. And then he called Herod which would be equivalent as president, the executive officer of Judea. He calls him a fox. Now, most of us think, well, a fox, that's sly and cunning. No, but in the Middle East, I grew up in the Middle East, remember, in Yemen. In the Middle East, a fox was not a nice, cunning animal. It was a dirty, thieving, cowardly animal that stole your chickens and killed your flock. It was the equivalent of a rat. Jesus was saying, when he calls Herod a fox, he says, tell that rat, a dirty, thieving, cowardly rat, that I will go where I want and I will lay my head where I want. Basically says, come and get me, is what he says. Jesus was not nice to his politicians if they needed to be called out. He was always calling them out. Okay. Now, Then I get this, yeah, but Neil, that's okay. But every time Christians have gone in politics, it has backfired and never worked. And I said, what? And they said, you know, and we shouldn't get involved in politics because people will see that witness and they'll turn away. And I said, well, did you ever hear the story of William Wilberforce? He was a politician in England, and he was appalled by slavery. And he basically, he said, you know, we can't keep giving salve and cushions to help the slaves in the bottom of these horrible slave ships. He said, we got to change the law. And for 40 years, he spent trying to change the law in England. Him and Thomas Clarkson traveled all over England trying to change the law. And for those 40 years, they were the most unpopular people in England. And 40 years later, they were able to change the law and ban slavery in England. Now you say, we shouldn't get involved in politics, or we failed. In fact, if you say we shouldn't get involved in politics, then you're saying all these things should be illegal. Slavery, racism, segregation, kidnapping, child labor, gladiatorial combat, death games, infanticide, child marriage, temple prostitution, child sexual abuse, child prostitution, wives of property, cruel treatment of prisoners, inequality of mankind. I've got a whole bunch more listed in the book. There are thousands of these laws in all of history that Christians got involved only because they got involved in politics. I mean, think about it. It used to be legal in Scandinavian countries for you to kidnap your wife and force her to marry you. A Christian went to a Scandinavian kid and said, we got to change this law. In Africa, they used to kill twins because they thought it was a superstitious thing. They thought they were witches or something. They would kill twins. A Christian got involved and changed the law. In India, a British person got involved to change the law because in India, they would throw, in Hinduism, they would take the widow of an old man, you know, he usually would marry some young gal, and then they would, and when he died, they would throw her on his funeral pyre to burn to death. Christians got involved. I mean, how heartless can we be to say we shouldn't get involved in politics? All these laws would still be on the books. It'd be illegal to have an infanticide. It'd be illegal to have child labor, gladiatorial combat. We changed that. How heartless could we be to say we shouldn't get involved in politics? How silly to say that we failed. I got an argument with an atheist once, and he says, I don't need your stupid Bible to be moral. I know that I shouldn't kill or rape. I said, well, it's quite obvious that you know you shouldn't kill or rape, simply because if you were killing people, then you know, society would come after you with murder. Everybody knows, even the Hammurabi Code has that. And if you were raping people, people would come after you with vengeance and that. I said, you know, you do need the Bible to stop child sacrifice. He goes, I know better not. I don't need to be told to stop child sacrifice. I said, yeah, you do. It's because the only reason it was stopped is because Christians got involved in politics. Because Christians use the Bible the Christians read the Bible and said, this is wrong. The only reason God, you don't think slavery is okay today is because Christians got involved to stop slavery. You see, brother, you have been borrowing our moral capital. If it wasn't there, if the Bible wasn't there to tell you that, you would think slavery was okay today. You would think gladiatorial combat, because the world was not changing its mind on those issues. Because laws also change hearts, you know. Here's an atheist. No good reason to think slavery is wrong, unless he's a slave. And then here's the other part that's very important. You know, when Thomas Clarkson and William Wilberforce were traveling around England trying to stop slavery, who was the helm? Pastor John Newton. He wrote Amazing Grace, right? And the church, St. Mary's Woolnoth. This is where they came back to be recharged. This is where they started their meetings. This is where they would conspire to break the law. The church was the center of this activity. Why is your church not the center of this activity? Why is your church not the center of changing the laws to be more godly, to stop injustice? Why is that? And I don't mean social justice, because social justice is an injustice. By the way, if you're ever wondering about social justice and biblical justice is protecting people's biblical rights, right? Rights. Social justice is trying to take goods from people and assign it to other people. Take a look at all the social justice causes. Maybe 5 of them are biblical justice causes. Most of them are what? Trying to assign rights as goods. I'm just saying goods as rights. So all to say that even atheists should want Christians in politics. Why? Because even atheists don't think slavery, child labor, child marriage, and bride kidnapping should be legal. I'm going to wrap this up. This last election was different and gave me a lot of hope. And I know what you're thinking. Hey, we lost the election. Looks like there was some cheating. But here's what happened. You see, it turns out there were about over 60 million evangelical Christians of voting age in America. And in most elections, we lose the elections by 10 million votes or 3 million votes. This last election was so close. And personally, I believe there was a lot of irregularities there. And we don't need to go into that. But here's the deal. For the last so many years, we deserve to be in this position because for the last so many years, with over 60 million evangelicals and us losing votes with 10 million votes or 3 million votes, only 20 million of us were voted. That means almost 40 million Christians were sitting on the sidelines. And folks, I'm betting there's still another 20 million out there. This last election was very polarizing. A lot of people came out. But I'm betting there's still another 20 million people with Christians out there. And half of them are voting for the wrong thing. And here's the encouragement. Did you know that there's a 3.5% rule? If we can get 3.5% of the population to agree with some peaceful cause, we can change the entire structure of our government. We can change the entire, they've had peaceful revolutions with just 3.5% of the population being there. Let me wrap this up here. And you know, God is sovereign. But remember the children of Israel, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and many other nations. God held them all responsible for choosing their way into destruction. Will he do likewise for us? You know, with our freedoms to evangelize being taken away from us, will Americans lose the ability to witness? And this is a real question. I hear in the news all the time, oh, we've reached a tipping point. I don't think we've reached a tipping point. We can do that in the Q&A. Why I don't think we reached. I don't think this is the end. You know, even MacArthur was there. Oh, this is the end. We've reached the tipping point. Somebody sent me an email the other day. It's like, well, you know, it's over. There's nothing we can do. America is going to slide its way into Sodom and Gomorrah. But I'll explain in the Q&A if you want. But here's the deal. If we don't do something soon, one day I'll have to turn to my daughter and say, honey, we have to leave this country because I gave a Bible to someone. Why? Because at that point, it will be illegal to give someone who's not a Christian a Bible, not only in Yemen, but in the United States of America. But just remember this, I escaped to come here. But if we lose freedom here, there's no place to run to. This may be the last time on earth. Thank you. Questions?
All right, if you guys have questions, you could go ahead and unmute yourself.
Let me turn up the volume here.
I have like 6 questions, but what do you mean we lose our rights because of the Bible part in the end? I don't get it. It's a little fear-mongering to me, to be honest.
Well, if we lose our rights to witness, if we lose our rights to evangelize, I mean, I've talked to people and they're like, oh, America will never change. America, oh, it's America. We've got our freedoms. I'm like, you know, countries die, nations die. History is littered with their bones. I mean, for us to think that America will never change is insanity. I was born outside, I grew up outside America. So I've seen these countries die. I've been in 3 civil wars, right? 2 of the countries that I left are still in civil wars, right? You know, and these countries have changed completely. Sudan used to be one country, now it's North Sudan and South Sudan. And South Sudan, which is supposed to be the Christian country, is still in a civil war amongst itself, right? It's just full of corruption. So I think it's very dangerous for us to think that we're not going to lose our rights. I mean, our church, by the way, and I was just telling Jane that, our church has been hit with $2.5 million worth of fines. Why? Because we refused to shut down. Now, I don't know about you, but if you look at my rights, which come from God, and you look at the Constitution, it makes no exceptions for anything. It says the freedom of religion, the right to meet and assemble shall not be abridged for any reason. And in no time in history in the past have we ever quarantined the healthy. We've always quarantined the sick. If somebody is a danger to somebody else, you can quarantine them. But you can't quarantine someone on mere suspicion that they may be a danger to someone. You can't arrest someone on mere suspicion without good evidence. So if you find somebody that you think is unhealthy or sick, no problem. But until you can prove that, you have no right to quarantine them. And this is, and in fact, if you look at all the states and countries that did not have this lockdown, let churches meet together, they continue to meet. we went to the county and we said, let us see their suicide rates. The county refused to send it to us. We called them, they refused to send it. We called them, they refused to send us. Finally, they blocked our number, right? So we had a press conference, CBS, ABC, and so you can look it up. You'll see my name on there. I was one of the speakers of the press conference. And we said, release the suicide rates, because I'll tell you, in LA County, the suicide rate not the rates, the calls to the suicide hotline went up by 80 times. That's 8,000%, right? So these are the things that we're going to run into if we don't protect our rights.
Understand. Okay, first question. So our founding fathers are mostly influenced by deism. The credo can mean anything. It could mean that we can born on natural rights. What do you think of that statement?
Say that again. Do you think it could be what?
The credo can mean anything. It can mean we are born with our natural rights.
Yeah, but who gives you rights? You can't be morally obligated to a thing. You can only be obligated to a person with authority. Now, let's say we're playing Scrabble. You and I are over at your house and we're playing Scrabble. And I throw out the Scrabble set, and it amazingly, some freak chance of evolutionary nature, it spells out, Norris, take out the garbage, right? Are you morally obligated to take out the garbage? No, because it's a Scrabble board. It's freak of nature. I mean, it just happened that you're not obligated to take out the garbage. But let's say that we don't put away the Scrabble after we play, and it was all a mess. And you come out the next morning, it says, Norris, take out the garbage, signed Mom. It's a lot of work to say that. But now are you morally obligated to take out the garbage? Yes, because Mom has authority for you. So assuming you're living in the house and we're in high school or something, then yeah, you are morally obligated. But let's say you come down and says, Norris, take out the garbage, and it's your little brother's name. Are you morally obligated to take out the garbage? No, unless your brother got the authority from your mom to tell you, right? So you can only be morally obligated to a person with authority. So there's no such thing as natural rights. The rights, I mean, it's okay, see, I have natural rights. I violated it. Why am I morally obligated not to observe your natural rights? You know, so that's the first thing. The second thing is something like 90% of the founding fathers were Christians, and a large majority of them were the most severe of Christians. They were Calvinists, right? I mean, so there were like 5 people who may not have been. You know, Benjamin Franklin might have been a deist. Jefferson was probably a deist. Paine was not even part of the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, so he was an atheist, definitely. So you can go down, and I think there are 2 others. I think Ethan Allen was, I think, atheist too. But 5 of them, but the rest of the majority were all devout Christians, and they were basing, and again, I gave you the foundation. You can't create rights from an atheism. And here's the other thing, a deistic God that they thought, Benjamin Franklin was, and Thomas Jefferson, if you read their writings, they're not the kind of deists that we think they are. Benjamin Franklin stopped the Constitutional Convention and said, we need to pray because we have to ask God to help us get past this block. And they prayed that morning. He asked, now a deist doesn't pray to God, hey, help us with this blockage of our constitutional writing. That's not a deistic view. Thomas Jefferson, despite the fact that he had slaves, he actually writes that God, unless we stop slavery, God will, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, will take his vengeance on us, right? And God did, because we took so long to stop slavery. So they were faulty men. They were not, you know, Washington was a slave owner. We understand all that. But they were definitely Christians. Most of them were Christians, and most of them got this concept. And there were some hardcore anti-slaverists in that group. In fact, the only reason why slavery was allowed to remain is because they would not have had all 13 colonies to fight the King of England. And it was like a compromise. And then maybe in a sense it was a bad compromise, maybe it was a good compromise. We can argue about that. But I don't think that we can say that it wasn't a Christian thing. I mean, it's not from the Enlightenment. There was nothing in the Enlightenment that said that. I mean, let's put it this way. There's nothing logically in the Enlightenment that would give you rights that anybody should care about, right?
Wait, but I thought that John Locke wrote that during the Enlightenment, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not necessarily happiness, that's not what he wrote, but I thought that was what John Locke wrote in the Enlightenment.
Yeah, he did write some of that, but again, the concepts are actually been doing for 200 years before, and Locke actually does not does not give you the reason. He doesn't say, well, the only, because if you think about it, yeah, you have the right to pursue happiness, but again, where's the authority coming from? So if you take Locke's ideas and you take what the pastors were saying, they're saying, look, it only makes sense if God, an authority over all mankind, gives you the right? And then you could argue, well, the king has the authority. No, the king, how did the king get the authority? The only way he got authority was by killing a bunch of people and oppressing them, right? Kings don't naturally have authority unless they take it by force.
But isn't Jesus the King of Jews? Isn't that his title? So then, by that logic.
Well, no, but think about, where did Jesus get his authority from? Because he's the creator of everything, right? Remember, we said the creator is the only one who has authority. Jesus is the creator. Every other king is a false king or usurper, right? I mean, or if God, for instance, when God appointed David, then David was a rightful king because the authority had appointed David as a king, right? So let me give you an example. So let's say I'm in the house and my wife and I want to go on a date. Well, I could say, okay, kids, I'm going to appoint your sister as the authority while we're here. You got to obey what she says. I have the authority to give them authority over my kids, right? But none of my kids can't fight amongst each other and decide who's going to be the authority because I've not given them the authority to do that, right? Does that make sense? Okay, next question.
Yeah, I like that. I like that answer. I like Scrabble. Oh yeah. Yeah. Another question is, well, my fourth question. I said, so the church and capitalism goes together well, but how does the church deal with policies of capitalism, like exploitation of workers? Does Jesus condemn capitalism? And I believe the divorce rate starts with mostly money issues. And do you think that's
so let me address the exploitation of workers. So you know the parable in the Bible where the man goes out in the morning at 9 o'clock and he looks at a bunch of workers and he says, hey, will you work for me and I will pay you this much money, a day's wages? The guy says, yeah, I'll come, and he starts working. Then about 11 o'clock, he goes out and he sees some men hanging out in the village. He says, hey, will you come work for me and I'll pay you a day's wages? And he does this, he keeps doing this. And finally, an hour before the end of the day, he sees some more men. He says, will you come work for me and I'll pay you a day's wages? And they all get to the end of the day and he pays them all the day's wages, the same amount. Well, one of the guys says, well, that's not fair. I worked the whole day and I just got a day's wages. He just worked an hour and he got a day's wages. And God says, or Jesus says, what is it to you? I made a deal with you. Nobody forced you to come and work for me. So in the same way, capitalism, as long as it's not forced, it's free. I mean, it's okay. So for instance, if I go out and I say, look, I'll pay you $10 an hour, and you say I'll work for $10 an hour, then I should be able to hire you for $10 an hour. And then if I then go to someone and say, I'll pay you $15 an hour, and you start saying, well, you said $10 an hour, but you're paying 15, I want 15. I can say to you, look, your wages, it's free to work. If you don't want to work for 10, that's fine. You can quit. Now, if you're a valuable employee, and I've started 4 startup companies, by the way, and I've had up to 100 employees. If you're a valuable employee, man, I'm going to go out of my way and say, look, you know what? Not only am I going to pay you 15, I'll pay you 17 because you're so good that I want to keep you. And so actually his wages end up being higher because he was negotiating for wages. So negotiation is a very part of that free market enterprise. And guess what happens when you do that? You get people at their level of competency. Now, what is exploitation of the workers? Exploitation of the workers is when you go to work and you say, you got to work for me or I'll kill you. That's exploitation. Or let's say that you're the only job in town and then you can't do anything. Well, here's where that changes. Let's say somebody is the only job in town. Let me give you an example. Let's say I had a piece of software and it was an operating system. And I said, if you want to use my operating system, you've got to pay me $100,000. And then some other guy came and he says, I'm going to do an operating system for $50,000. Well, guess what? All my business is going to go to the $50,000 guy, right? Let's say then another guy says, hey, I'm going to do an operating system for $79,000. And his name is Bill Gates. Well, guess what? All those other guys who are spending money, who are charging all that expensive operating system are like, oh, wow, he's selling millions and billions. And then Bill Gates starts to flood the market with his operating system. And then people go, whoa, wow, he's got a monopoly. No, he doesn't have a monopoly. He just has a good product for cheap. Maybe you don't like Windows. So guess what? You go to Apple. Apple charges a bit more for its operating system. So then you're willing to pay more. Well, Apple, you got to pay for the hardware too, right? So you pay a bit more. And the free market goes on. And then somebody comes and says, you know what? I don't want to pay any of these guys. I'm going to do a free version, and we're going to call it Linux. And then all these people say, well, you know, Linux is so hard. We're going to do Red Hat Linux, and we're going to do all these different Linuxes to help you to help you use it properly, right? So again, the free market is the best innovator of anything. And the minute you start controlling prices and controlling people, you're going to stifle the free market. Let me tell you, the reason why America and Israel has the biggest innovation is because of the free market. And why did China go to the free market? I mean, I visited China a few years ago. I was looking for products, and I said, you know, I was asking the person, I said, and I don't know if this is true. She may or not be telling. So I said, well, does the government give you free healthcare? She goes, no. Does the government give you free housing? She goes, no. So what does the government do? She says, it forces us to do what they want us to do, and we have to obey them. I said, so it's not really a communist country, not really a socialist country, because free market is there. You know, you can buy whatever you want, sell whatever you want. It's just a fascist country, right? So a lot of times you can see what, you know, Vietnam went to the free market on a local economy. Many countries are going to free market simply because it's the only thing that works. It's the reality. And I've got loads of other examples. I don't want to belabor the point. But there is no exploitation of workers unless you're forcing the worker to do your job. And if you're the only game in town, as long as you're the only game in town, if you, well, let me give you, I'm trying to think of a good example. If you're the only game in town, the economy, the only way you can stay the only game in town is by two things: violence. You know, let's say you have a farm and you're growing something, and somebody else grows the same thing, and you say, I don't like that, and you send your thugs to beat them up. That would be not the free market. That is what? Violation. But then the government should come in and stop him from doing that. But then if the thug starts paying the government off, again, that's not the free market. That's the government getting involved, right? So we actually create governments to allow us to do free markets, but a lot of times the governments actually get in and stifle the free market. In fact, there's a good example, and I'll save it for a different time. You can't have a monopoly without a government. It's as simple as that.
Okay, I understand that. Like the computer stuff example. Last question. What do you think of Republican Christians taking human rights because they quote the Bible or something for family values, like Republican Christians take away trans rights because family values.
Like transgender rights?
Yeah.
Now remember, you have no rights as a member of a group that you don't have as an individual. For instance, I don't get rights by being a member of the Brown group. You don't get rights as being a member of Chinese group or Vietnamese group or whatever, right? I'm assuming by your last name, you're Vietnamese, right? Am I right? Yeah. So you don't get any special rights by being a member of the Vietnamese group, right? You have rights as an individual. Rights come as individuals. So whatever rights you have as an individual is what you have. So a person who's transgender has the same rights as a person who's homosexual, same rights as a person who's white, same rights as a person who's brown. You don't get any new rights as transgender, right? So what rights do you have as transgender? What are they trying to limit you on? Are they trying to say you can't be transgender? No, what they're saying is that I'm not going to be forced to call you by your transgender pronoun. Why? Because that's not an imposition on you, that's an imposition on me. Remember the great case with, what's his name, Jordan, right? He said, look, if I'm interacting with you personally and you say, please call me she or they or them, I'll be happy to. But when the government comes and says, I'm going to force you, your freedom of speech, I'm going to restrict your freedom of speech, then there's a problem, because you're not giving them more rights, you're taking away my rights. You see that? And so that's the issue. Now, if you come and say, well, here's a transgender person and they were discriminated for being transgender. I'm like, how were they discriminated? Well, they went into a job and the owner did not want to hire them. I said, well, who's paying the bills? The owner. Okay. Whose business is the owner? So what rights should the owners have? The owner should have the right to hire anybody, whether they like it or not. And if you don't like it, you should do what the Chinese did. You see, when the Chinese first came here, they were brought here to build the railroads. And the white people were discriminating them. So they said, fine, discriminate against us, we'll start our own community. So they started Chinatowns, and everything that you needed was in the Chinatown. They did business. Today, Chinese are some of the richest people in America, right? Indians, they came here with, as doctors and lawyers, we're some of the richest people in America. Why? Because we are like, we don't care what you guys are doing. We don't care about your rights. A few years ago, many years ago, back in the 80s, I had just joined AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, as a product engineer, and then moved to an application engineer. And my cousin was there as a semiconductor engineer. And we would hang out in the evenings, and we had this discussion. I said, you know, we're never going to get rich just as engineers. We've got to start our own company. Well, my cousin said, well, you know, there's no way we'll start our own company because nobody's going to give a bunch of Indians money. I said, well, who will they give money? He says, well, he said, you got to have a white guy with a big nose who drinks a lot of beer and can be chummy with all his mucky mucks. They'll give him money. I said, great, let's find one of those guys. Let's hire him as our president and CEO, and we'll be the guys who actually do the work. And we'll just give him part of the company. And he said, yeah, that could work. And then my nephew, my cousin's son, we call him nephew in India. My nephew was sitting there and he said, well, that's not fair. I said, why is it not fair? He says, why should we suffer because they won't give us money? I said, why do I care if they won't give us money and they'll only give a white guy money? Because if we can get that money, in a few years, we'll be the ones giving money to other people. We'll be the venture capitalists. And guess what? In Silicon Valley today, you can't go to a venture capitalist that doesn't have an Indian on their board or is not controlled by Indians. The Indians can get the most money. Why? We didn't worry about what this did or what that did. We said, let's work around the system. Let's use it to our advantage. And that's what the Chinese did. And that's what the Vietnamese are doing. That's what many communities are doing. And that's what we're trying to teach with every Black Lives Matters. We're trying to teach the Black community to do that and to get away from all the years of being oppressed by welfare and things like that. So I don't think, again, remember, there's no right you get as a group that you don't already have as an individual. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but okay, I understand that. I'm gonna repeat the question maybe about that trans example. Okay, I'm gonna project it. I have a problem with Republican Christians trying to be very compassionate, but not very compassionate at all. How do I cope with that? I'm just being honest with you, because maybe it's my liberal demon mind. I'm an atheist, by the way, but yeah, I have a hard time coping with that.
So wait, say that you said your liberal what mind?
Fake news media, I'm crazy, liberal mind. It's a joke.
No, I know, but again, I don't think it's, I mean, the reality is that, so there was a study done a few years ago by John Stossel. He wanted to see who was more giving. Was it the liberals or the conservatives? And then Ram Kanan did the same thing. And he found out that the liberals are very happy to give government money to people, but they actually donated far less. In fact, if you look at that, if you go back to that slide I put, most of those come from Christians and conservatives. In fact, Christians and conservatives give 60% more than what liberals give. So so yeah, here's why I think it comes across that we're less compassionate. You won't find many Christians actually advertising that they give, because Jesus said, don't advertise. So when they actually go and start asking people questions and they start calculating, they said, wow, Christians and conservatives give a whole lot more. For instance, let me give you a few examples. You know, one of the complaints we always get is, you Christians only care about abortions. You don't care about the babies after they're born. That's simply nonsense. Christians give more money than anybody else. In fact, if you weird, but the majority, right? Did you know that, very forward, if you went to Liberty University and said you were pregnant, but you were going to, and you didn't have a family to take, or family had rejected you and all that, and if you said that you would keep your baby, he would give you full health care, full scholarship, and childcare so you could go to school and graduate, as long as you kept your baby. And then when you had the baby, you could choose to keep the baby or to let families adopt it. Do you know that Christian families adopt a large number of babies. In fact, it's kind of ridiculous when you know how long the waiting time is for adoption. Christians adopt so many babies. In fact, the problem that people think is, kids, families without kids adopt. No, we have 3 kids. We would adopt tomorrow. If you came to us with a baby, in fact, just a few weeks ago, one of my friends ran into a gal who was pregnant, and she wasn't married. She was like 17 or 18, and my wife said, "Can I have her baby?" I'm like, honey, because we will take another baby. We'd be happy to have another baby, right? We'd be happy to adopt. I mean, most families, I have my sister has adopted one, and they're going to adopt another. I have a friend who has adopted 10, and most of them, not 10, sorry, 7. They 3 of their own, 7 they adopted, and most of those are out of foster families, right? He's got like 3 black kids and Hispanics and all that. So the fact that but you'll never hear this in the news, right? You'll never hear this said anywhere. So yeah, maybe we don't come across as the most compassionate people because we're not advertising it. But if you start going and looking at churches, what they're doing, it turns out the average church in America saves the city over $140,000 a year. And that's a church of 100 people. Imagine the churches, some churches are 400, some churches are 4,000. I know there's a church down here that every Tuesday, there's a long line of cars, and what they're doing, they're giving out free food. Where they get the free food? Not from the government, it's from all the families who go to that church, right? Christians are doing that. Now, I'm not saying that makes us better. I'm just saying God has commanded to do that, but you might not know that we're doing that. That's all.
Yeah,
Can I
Dago,
ask for a
I
really
feel.
quick clarification? I'm so sorry.
Right.
If that would, cool. Well, firstly, I just want to say thank you for your point of view. I wanted to clarify really quickly about the points of Christians adopting more on average. Would you say that that might be correlative to the higher percentage of Christians in the country, as opposed to a maybe an inherent want of Christians to adopt more?
No, I think that's per capita. I'll look up the evidence, but I'm pretty sure it's per capita. But here's
So
the other
you're saying globally Christians per capita are more likely to adopt as opposed to other theologians or non-denominations?
I'll tell you a funny story. And it's partly we've created that. I'll tell you a funny story. So a few years ago, I had a Hindu friend who went back to India to adopt. And he came back and he was like, yeah, I had to tell him I was a Christian because he married an American gal who went back to India to adopt. And I said, why? He says, because they won't let you adopt unless you're a Christian. And there was another Hindu friend right next to me. He says, those Christians, how dare they tell us who can adopt our own kids? And my first friend who had said he was a Christian when he wasn't, said, yeah, when the Hindus start running orphanages like the Christians, then you can say that. But until you say that, you can't. You see, we're the ones who started the orphanages in India. Now the government has taken over and they're not doing a very good job. Now, it doesn't mean that Christians are perfect. I mean, we've heard of horror stories out of Christian orphanages, but Christians are the ones who generally started these orphanages. Christians are we're the ones who did the first charities, the first hospitals, the first elder care. We're the ones who did that. In fact, in the New Testament, when the plague would come through places like Rome, all the Romans would flee out of the city. And then the Christians would come out of the woodwork and they would start attending to the sick and they would start taking care of them. And some of them would get the plague and die. But many of them because in those days, actually the plague, like the virus, a lot of times it's just getting the right minerals and right vitamins and right herbs and being taken care of that would let you survive. And so a lot of them would survive the virus. And then what happens when the virus came through the second time, guess what? They were immune. And so the tribe of Christians would grow and grow and grow. And so it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in that case. Now, of course, many other countries, they've gone to government, government orphanages. And I hate to say that, it's actually a bad thing because governments don't have as much compassion as Christians. Now, there are Muslim orphanages, there are Hindu orphanages being started, but again, there's a big difference. I hate to say it, but it really is.
Yeah, isn't the American government most primarily made up of Christians, though?
No, I would say if you go into Congress today, I would say a majority are not Christians. Go to the
I'm
Senate.
pretty sure we could check that and that
Well,
they are.
You go up and ask, are you a born again Christian? Do you believe in that you repentant, believe in the resurrection of Jesus? Trust
I'm
me.
sorry, you cut out. I couldn't
No,
quite
I
hear
said,
that.
is Jesus your Lord and Savior? Do you believe in the Bible as of the Word of God? Do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus? I'm telling you, you're not going to get people saying that. You'll say, people will say, well, I'm a Catholic, or I'm a Presbyterian, or I'm this. I don't know what your beliefs are, but that's not a Christian. Christian is what? Somebody who believes in Jesus as Lord and Savior, has repented of his sins, and asks for forgiveness, right? And believes the Bible, as far as we know, believes the Bible is the Word of God. Now, you know, there's some variations on that, but I would say that's what a Christian is. And that's what we're talking about. Because remember, when we're talking about Christianity, we're not talking about adhering to a set of rules. We're talking about a changed life. We're talking about the Holy Spirit in your life. He has changed you from the inside out. We're talking about that your soul is renewed. We're not talking about following a set of rules. God didn't come to make you follow a set of rules, because you could follow a set of rules and you'd still hate God. It's all about a relationship with God, right? God doesn't create this universe because he wants you to obey his rules. He creates this relationship because he wants relationship. I was talking to an atheist friend, and he was arguing with me. He says, why did God, because I talk about the creation of the universe and, how it took 13.7 billion years. He says, why did God take all this time to do all these things? And then he said, why does he, he gets you to go out and take care of the poor and the sick. Why doesn't he just heal them right on the spot? And I said, well, it's all about a relationship. He says, how's that? He says, well, he creates the whole universe because he enjoys creating. He takes his time to create this thing. Time doesn't mean anything to God, right? So now you come to the relationship part. He creates human beings because he wants relationship. He doesn't need relationship. He wants relationship because he's the God of love. So he creates a group of people. Now he has a dilemma. These group of people are going to reject him because they have to have freedom. How can you have love without freedom? So they're going to reject him. And even if you're a Calvinist or not a Calvinist, this still applies to the very first Adam, right? He would need the freedom to reject God. To have a relationship with someone, they have to have the opportunity to not have a relationship with you, right? So he has to give them the option to have a relationship. And some of them are going to take that option to reject him. And most of them did. So now he's in a dilemma. How does he solve that? He wants a relationship. Well, he's got to be a just God. And I go through a talk about why God has to punish sin. So he has to be a just God. He has to punish sin. And so now what? So he said, look, I'm going to sacrifice myself for your sin. But following that, it has to be a relationship. Right? So there's and this, hopefully you'll tie this together. There's a grandfather clock that we have downstairs. And I have kids. My youngest is 6, as I show you on the picture. And when he's slowly growing out of it, which is kind of sad. But when he was 3 or 4, in fact, all the kids, when they were 3 or 4, they would want to help you wind the grandfather clock. And now, for me, it takes me 30 seconds to wind the grandfather clock. I grab the key, I lift the lid, and I crank it, and it's done. Right? I got to do it once a week. But with the kids, they want to help. So I got to lift up the top of the clock. I got to carry them. I got to help them put the key in. And then they're not strong enough to turn the key, or they turn it the wrong way, or they're bending it. So I got to guide them. And it takes me a full 3-4 minutes to get it all done. And then if there's another kid, I got to help both kids fight about which, where they do one half or the other half, right? But while they were young, I would never, in fact, I walk by the clock and say, I got to wind it. But I would wait till the next day when the kids were up to wind. Why? Because that time with them, I get to cuddle with them. You can't replace that relationship. God can't artificially create a relationship with you. It has to be real. That means you have to develop that relationship. He has to develop, God, if he says, well, I have a relationship with you. Well, that's not real relationship. Real relationship, like real love, has to be freely given, freely taken. And that's what this whole universe is about. That's what this world is about, right? So when you talk about these politicians, do they have a relationship with the Almighty God? Do they have a relationship with Jesus Christ, who is God? I'd say they don't. Not many of them.
I'm sorry. I'm just a little bit confused on why your assumption would be that they don't.
Well, look at the laws they've passed, right? Look at their principles. Look what they've been saying. Look how they legislate. If you love God, you're going to love his laws. And yet they legislate against his laws most of the time, right? And then the legislators who do fight for the righteous thing are attacked and destroyed in the media. So I would say of our legislative. Remember, I know some of these guys personally. I've met them. I've been to Washington, D.C. Not this lot, but back in 2006, 2007, I was in D.C. every year, right? I met these guys. And I could tell you that I met the Christians. When I was traveling in Kansas City, I'm sorry, in Kansas, not Kansas City, I was traveling to Kansas with the governor. We called the invitation of their legislator, Christian legislators. I don't know, I think there were like 50 of them, 17 of them were the ones who came, and 17 of them professed Christ. That's a very small percentage at the time. This was years ago, but now it's probably less, I don't know. But all to say, I don't.
I just have one last question really quick, and I'm sorry I've taken up so much time.
No.
But again, I'm sorry I came in late. I was just getting off a rehearsal. But so I'm guessing that the premise of this is that Christians should be involved, or true Christians should be involved in politics to sort of steer guide the morality of the country into a correct way. Is that, am I on the right path
here? You have to
here?
go back and look at rights and goods. You have to understand. When did you come in?
I just got here at like 8 o'clock.
Okay, so yeah, so the whole premise, you don't have the whole premise. Can I encourage you to go back and watch it? I don't know, Jana, is that going to be available?
Yes.
Of course. I'm just, okay, so let me just really quickly ask this. When this country was founded, obviously we were founded by the majority of founders who were very religious, very highly religious. I know you had mentioned the odd ones who didn't quite fit that mold, but the majority of founders at the time were highly religious, very Christian folk. And would you say that that morality in the country at the time is more apt to like a Christian, a better sense of Christianity than the country that we have now, or would you disagree with that?
I would disagree with that.
Okay.
Let me tell you why. If I said this to you, if I said only 17% of the country attends church, and a woman in New York is more likely to be pregnant out of wedlock than to attend the church, what decade would you say that is? Let me say it again. Only 17% of the country attends church, and a woman who's pregnant out of wedlock, a woman in New York is more likely to be pregnant out of wedlock than to attend the church. What decade would you think that is?
I mean, I would say that's anywhere from probably the 60s beyond till now.
That's 1776. 1776. The reason we have a biblical constitution is that the people who were involved in politics were Christian. Today, the number of Christians in America has been growing every year, and it kept growing until the 80s. In the 80s, were something like 54% that were Christians. Today, it's down to like 43%. And now some of that might be self-weeding out, because in those days, it was traditional to go to church and all that. Today, there are more Christians than have ever been in America. In fact, there are more Christians in the entire world than have ever been in the entire history of the world. Right? Every year they're getting more and more Christians. Today, there's some calculations are somewhere between 33 to 34% of the entire world is more Christian. Today, people are getting more and more Christians. The problem is they're not getting involved in changing the law. Some of them are. Uganda, they are. In certain countries, they are. I think Zambia, they are. But sometimes they are Christians, and they, Rwanda was Christian, and look what happened in Rwanda, right? So it doesn't mean that it's going to follow politically or legally, because they don't have that foundation. So no, I think we're more Christian today. I think the Christians are less involved.
And you would say that that's had a negative impact on the morality of politics?
Well, and there are less Christians involved in politics, less Christians involved in the media, which influence the people to vote the way the media wants them to vote. And there's also, I do a whole talk on the Frankfurt School, which brings into liberation theology, critical race theory. So a little by background that I didn't mention, critical race theory or liberation theology, the foundation of critical race theory is liberation theology and the Frankfurt School, which was in Columbia in the 1930s. These things do kind of merge and you get critical race theory. That's what's being pushed right now by BLM. Well, one of the big pushes for critical race theory is liberation theology. And you get Black liberation theology out of that. 40% of all Black churches adhere to Black liberation theology, which is a problem. But when I would go home to India, even though my grandfather was a Christian and my ancestors were Christian, when I would go home to India, the arguments at the table were which Communist Party was the better one. Should they join the Communist Party or the Communist Party Marxist? My father was an atheist and a communist until I was 5. I grew up in this communism stuff. So even though my father became a Christian at the age of 5, all my cousins were communists, and many of them are still atheists, right? So I'm surrounded by this stuff. My uncle was the chairman or the spokesperson or the chairman, basically, of the World Council of Churches, which is the foundational institution that pushes liberation theology. He was the chairman of it, right? So he ran the organization. So I'm steeped in all this stuff. I grew up in all this stuff. And I can tell you that there has been a Marxist attempt right from the beginning. And I have some friends who are democratic socialist operatives, worked in Nicaragua to overthrow the government there, and now became a Christian. These guys are all telling me that, not just the media, but there is a active socialistic Marxist attempt to take over the politics in America. And so I think we've seen that, and the Christians have been told, oh, don't be involved in politics, don't be involved in politics. And you see this. So what we're seeing is a consequence of all those years. Even though there are more Christians today, they're acting like, oh, cowardly people. And there's no good reason for us to be that. Let me give you an example. Jane knows this example, right? A few years ago at San Jose State University, they said, and I think it's still this case, right? They said, and Jane, correct me if my memory's wrong. They said, we have, Ratio Christi had to shut down their campus affiliation. Why? Because they changed the rules saying that you don't have to be a Christian to be elected as president or officer of Ratio Christi, right? Remember that?
Yep.
And I said, Jane, I have a solution for you. She goes, what? I said, that was quite easy. Gather up like 50 Christians and go join the atheist group and vote a Christian as the president of the atheist group. Then go get those same 50 Christians, go to the Hindu group and appoint and elect a Hindu president. Go to the Muslim group and do the same thing. I'm sorry, elect a Christian president, go to the same group. I said, within a few months, the campuses will change their mind, go, this is a bad idea. But Jane, what? Nobody was interested in doing something like that because it's bold, it's out there, and yeah, you'll get hate. People will hate you, but it's the only way to do it. And so I think a lot of times we're just afraid of doing things.
Last question. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think we have, what, 5 more minutes, Jane, or what's our?
Yeah, we can take the question.
Yeah. So Black Lives Matter is mostly speaking against the police powers being abusive and take away into lives. What do you think of Black Lives Matter with the police? What should we do about that?
So there are a lot of police injustices. In fact, if you go to our Every Black Lives Matters page, you'll see where we list police injustices. We talk about the Innocent Project. One of our tenets is criminal justice reform. We just think that Black Lives Matter have chosen the wrong spokesman. George Floyd was the wrong person to pick. There was another young man in a Walmart some 6 years ago, just walking around, and he picked up a toy gun. The police came in and shot him. Okay, that's the guy they should have had in the front. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. I actually talked about him in one of my articles. Those are the guys that they should be up in front. Why are you picking George Floyd? Why are you bringing Michael, what's his name? Michael Brown. Why are you picking Trayvon Martin? These guys are not good role models. There's so many good role models, African Americans who were not criminals, had no criminal background, were innocent people and were killed by the police. But then for that matter, there were so many people who were white that were killed by the police. I did a calculation.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you believe that Black lives only matter when they're innocent or by your standards morally good? Because
No.
I personally believe that no one should have to die at the hands of police brutality, and it's regardless of what they did.
Yeah, but did you understand the case with Michael Brown? Michael Brown was charging the officer. George Floyd was
I don't believe that a one-off case would denounce the entire movement. I understand that Michael Brown was charging the police, but it seems like a kind of a scapegoat to go, well, I mean, they weren't angels and Michael Brown did chase the police. Therefore, the tens of hundreds of others who have died needlessly at the police, it's not as valid.
Now remember, I run a Black-led organization, right? So I have studied all these cases. What about Trayvon Martin? What about George Floyd? We can go down the line. All I'm saying is that let's fight this battle the right way. Let's get the innocent people. Again, you're not going to get the average person on your side if you want to fight this battle. That's why when we champion people, we champion the real innocent people saying this guy should never have been shot. But here's the other question. Police
I think none of them should have been shot.
Well, if you're charging a police officer, George Floyd was not shot, but if you're charging,
Yeah, no, his neck was kneeled on for 8.5 minutes. Sorry, my bad.
and we can argue what he died about again. But my point was that you want to pick the guys who are squeaky clean, and there are enough of them. Why are you picking these guys? But here's the second part of that. It's very important to understand. There is not a higher incidence of you being killed if you're black by the police than if you're white.
I think that is a fact, that if you are a person of color, you will be targeted more often by police.
But there's no increased rate of death, and I have all the numbers. In fact, let me tell you the most dangerous person to be. So here's the stats. If you look at all the violent crime in America, 53% of homicides are done by black people, against mostly black people. Now, that's the first thing. Secondly, so naturally there's going to be, the police are going to say, oh, wow, if I run into someone who looks like a gang member, and why is that? That's what we put them in that case. It's the government that put them there. The socialist movement that took the father out of the home is what led to this. You take the father out of the house, you end up with gang members, people involved in drugs and violence and all that stuff. It's because they're looking for family, they're looking for parents. And I have reams of data on our website. Remember, I just happen to be the VP. But I'm in part of a black-led organization. This is our focus here. We want to solve these problems, and we want to solve the real problems. So if you start looking at it, you go, okay, 53% of all homicides in America are done by black men. What? Black men between the ages of what? Between the age of 16 and 29. I disciple a young black man. And he came to me, he says, when this whole thing was going on, he says, why am I discriminated more than anyone else? I said, well, let me tell you why you're discriminated. I trust you with your life. I've been discipling you for 3 years. I trust you with my life. But when you walk in that 7-Eleven, they're going to look at you and they're going to understand the profile of men, boys who look like you, especially if you're wearing your pants around around your knees. He doesn't wear that. He's a very good looking, very well dressed young man. And I think I had some influence in that. I said, but you walk into a 7-Eleven, they're going to think, oh, look, he matches the description. I said, remember, when I first came to America, most Indians were doctors and lawyers and engineers. So not lawyers, doctors and engineers. And I would go and talk to somebody and say, they'd say, oh, you're an Indian, you must be smart. And I'm like, why do you think I'm smart? Do you know that there's 1 billion Indians in India that are not smart? I'm not that smart. I just happen to be here, one of the people. But the reason why you think that they're smart, because the only way you could stay in America as an Indian is if you had a master's degree. You couldn't stay with a bachelor's degree. You had to have a master's degree in one of the specialized fields. It couldn't be a master's degree in English, had to be a master's degree in the sciences, physics, chemistry, math, or medical doctor. So naturally the bias is, okay, well, Indians are smart, but Indians are not smart. They're not no smarter than anybody else. So now when you have this bias in the news and all that, you're seeing black kids. So I told the young man, I said, look, the reason that they think you're dangerous is because you fit that description. You're not dangerous. In fact, the reality is even that description, those 53% of those things, that the ages from 16 to 29 only compose of 3% of the population, because 13% of the population is black, 3%. Of that 3%, only something like 0.1% are actually violent. Yet that stigma spreads to everybody else. How do we change that stigma? How do we change the idea that black men are dangerous? Well, first of all, we try to change the fact that black men are dangerous because they need a father, right? We try to change that. We try to change the schooling. We try to change, and that's what EBLM is doing. We're going to the cities and we're trying to change the laws. We're trying to change the understanding of all this. We're trying to change people to understand that just because someone is black, that doesn't mean they're dangerous. And we have police officers on our group, and they said, look, I don't care if they're black or white. And in fact, black police officers, and they said, I don't care if they're black or white. They act like they're looking at me and they're shifty, and I think that they're portraying gang sort of activity. That's why when I say George Floyd and all these guys, you got to talk to people who are not involved in gangs and then look at them as the innocent people. And then here's the other thing that we should not forget.
Anil, please excuse me. I know that the time is going. We have just a minute.
Yeah. I'll give you a question to answer your question. I want to finish this point. It's very important.
Okay, finish it.
Here's the reality that happens. If you look at the statistics of all the violent crimes, and if you look at the ratio of violent crimes to deaths by police, it is more dangerous to be an Asian. 0.6% of every Asian that is involved in altercation with the police die. It's only 5 for no, it's point. Yeah, no, sorry, it's 1%. It's 1% of something for the Asians involved in a violent crime who get killed. It's 0.6 for whites, and it's 0.5 for blacks. There's actually less chance of you, if you're a violent black man, for you to die with a police altercation. It's a higher chance if you're Asian.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Neil, for your presentation. And I just hope that we can, yeah, continue the conversation, because we live in really polarized times, and this is what we're here for. We want to talk through these hard issues of life to see, you know, how are we supposed to live this life? Where does truth come from? Where does morality come from? And so, yeah, just thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the discussion, and I hope to see you guys next week. I think our conversation next week is on evolution, so it's like, it's kind of really different from this last talk, but yeah, but Neil, if you have anything, any closing statements or anything, go for it.
I think it's very important that we understand the logical and rational reasons for why people have rights, the logical and rational reasons why you have to have a creator in the equation. Without the equation, without the creator, you don't have rights. And if you don't have rights, you don't have anything. Now, as far as all the other issues about BLM and all, that's the EBLM part of me. I think we have the right policy, and I think that's the winning policy. And that's what we are working towards, is actually solving the real problems about the Black lives in the inner city. And you'll see us out there on a daily basis working with different groups. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we'll be out in an area in African-American community in Florida, giving out food and trying to teach people how to make themselves self-sufficient and get over it. Now, you asked me a real quick question. I'll just do it really quick. Why is the African-American, they have an unreasonable plight. If you look at the Chinese community, if you look at the Vietnamese community, if you look at all these other communities that were also discriminated against, why is the African-American community so much more discriminated against, or so much more in a worse situation? And we talk about that on our website. We explain 2 big groups, systemic racism caused by 2 groups. I'm not going to name the groups, but one group managed the KKK, and they actually came over, and then they actually set into place this systematic way of making African Americans dependent on the system. And the second group that went in and targeted African Americans for genocide. They were killing them specifically, and you know, you can guess who they are. 36% of them were killed specifically. So you destroy the family, you destroy all this, and we need to stop that from happening. If you care about Black lives, you got to care that every Black life matters.
Thank you, Neil. I really enjoy your talk. It is enlightening, and you are doing a good job. And keep it up.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
So if we ever get back in person, you know, this would be the part where we would all go make our way over to Denny's and eat together or something. But for now, I guess that's the end.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, everybody have a good night.